We are now ready for our next panel, and I'm very excited to introduce Delegate Stolle, who's going to be our moderator. He represents the citizens of the 83rd House District in Virginia. He serves on the House Appropriations, County, Cities, and Towns, and Health, Welfare, and Institutions Committees for the General Assembly. Delegate Stolle also serves on the Board of Veterans Services, the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization, and the Joint Commission on Healthcare. In addition to championing many major veterans, transportation, and healthcare initiatives, Delegate Stolle is the chairman of the General Assembly's Joint Subcommittee on Coastal Flooding. He also is the patron of the legislation that created the subcommittee and the bill that sponsored the Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flooding Resiliency, which we just discussed. He, along with other members of the subcommittee, have passed numerous bills aimed at flooding adaptation and coastal resiliency. He received the Sierra Club's 2014 Leadership Award, recognizing his efforts to advance the Commonwealth's initiatives to address recurrent flooding and resiliency, and was a participant at the 2015 Union of Concerned Scientists Rising Tide Summit, which included local, city, and state leaders from the coastal states. Delegate Stolle is a retired naval officer who started his naval career in the submarine force, qualifying as a naval nuclear engineer. He later earned his doctorate of medicine at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Services. He currently serves as Vice President of Medical Affairs at Riverside Regional Medical Center. He's a native of Virginia Beach, a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and holds an MBA from the College of William & Mary. Welcome, Delegate Stolle. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm just so pleased to be here. It just incredible amount of energy and intellect going behind these presentations and engaged. Truly amazing amount of movement that we've had in this area. When Elizabeth contacted me, I was particularly interested in this particular panel. We spend an awful lot of time talking about resiliency, and we spend a lot of time talking about the risks associated with sea level rise and climate change and flooding. Somewhere there has to be opportunity here. Somewhere there has to be a silver lining to the cloud, and I think the area that figures that out, this is an opportunity for us to actually absolutely excel. I think it's an opportunity for us to improve our economy and to come up with marketable skills. And so having this panel on opportunities that are presented by recurrent flooding, I think is particularly valuable. Take a minute to introduce the panel. Miss Kathleen Purdy Owens, Commander, U.S. Navy Reserve, retired. Ms. Purdy Owens received an engineering degree from the Ohio State University and served 21 years in the United States Navy and the Navy Reserve as an aviator. She was a pilot for United Airlines for over 17 years and has accumulated over 10,000 military and commercial flight hours. Ms. Purdy Owens holds a Class A contractor's license, and her company, Beach Development Group, has developed several commercial properties in the Hampton Roads area. She is a member of numerous professional organizations and was recently selected as a member of Congressman Scott Taylor's Sea Level Rise Advisory Group. She serves on the board of directors for Virginia Beach Central Business District Association, the Virginia War Memorial, and the Virginia War Memorial Foundation. Thanks for being here today. Dr. Paul Robinson. Dr. Robinson's currently the executive director of RISE, a nonprofit organization dedicated to developing innovative technologies in the resilience sector. Funded by $10 million, RISE aims to grow resilience-related businesses in the local area and to assist in access to worldwide markets for their technologies. Dr. Robinson is founder and CEO of Aerotech Research, a company specializing in weather hazard detection for aircraft. Dr. Robinson is also a senior advisor to Focus Investment Bank in the areas of government, aerospace, and defense. He is also a member of a local angel investment group, 757 Angels, and Abundance 360. He works with several startups in technical and managerial roles. Thank you for being here. Christopher Kit Chope, Vice President, Sustainability. Kit Chope joined Virginia Port Authority in July 2015 after retiring from the United States Navy with 26 years of service. a tactical jet aviator. Highlights of his career include command of Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia Beach and Strike Fighter Squadron 22 in Lemoore, California. In his capacity as Vice President Sustainability, Kit leads and orchestrates all internal and external engineering, port development, environmental policy, and process excellent activities to ensure the Port of Virginia operates and grows sustainably and innovatively. He is actively involved in local community through membership on several boards and is a 2014 alumnus of Civic Leadership Institute. Kit holds a BA in International Politics from the Citadel and an MA in National Security and Strategic Studies from the U.S. Naval War College. And certainly, finally, but not least, Paul Battaglia is a designer with 20 years experience working in as both a practitioner and an educator. He has experience with programming, project management, design, and construction administration in DoD, corporate, and higher education projects. He joined the firm Clark Nexsen as a senior architect in 2011 and was promoted to architectural department head of the Virginia Beach office in 2014. As head of the Virginia Beach Architectural Department, he collaborates with clients and project teams to provide innovative design solutions. He previously taught architectural design at Virginia Tech School of Architecture and at North Carolina State University College of Design, and held adjunct appointments at Virginia Commonwealth University and Hampton University. Prior to teaching, he practiced architecture for nearly 10 years in Richmond, Virginia, where he worked on projects ranging from residential renovations and additions to large aviation, public, corporate, and healthcare projects. His ability to draw from and synthesize his experiences as both an academic and a practitioner serves his clients and his projects well. Paul served as chair of the Virginia Society Design Committee and organized lecture series that invite award-winning practitioners and academics to share their work with the local architectural community. He is both a Master's of Architecture and a Bachelor of Architecture from Virginia Tech. Thank you also for being here today. Vandal Owens.
Thank you, Delegate Stolle, and thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you all for being here today. Because they couldn't find anyone named Paul to do this, then you're kind of stuck with me today. So they asked me to talk about opportunities from sea level rise in the commercial real estate industry. And as we all know, without commercial real estate, we don't have much of a city at all. So I'm going to start out by comparing three other places around the nation to get an idea of where we are with the tale of three cities. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, a town was founded on soggy mud flats. They found mud deep enough to consume dogs and small children, and because of the proximity to the sea and the tide going in and out, they found some very upsetting problems with their plumbing. Fortunately, they had a fire that destroyed all their wooden buildings and allowed them to make some changes in the city. And they changed their building code to become only structures made out of bricks and stone. And they also decided to raise their streets 8 feet. Then they discovered that people would pay a lot for a cup of coffee, and everyone lived dry and caffeinated ever after. Many years ago, in a distant land, a city was founded on a swamp. The city dwellers did a really good job of draining the swamp, but there's nothing they could do with the plague of rain causing floods in their area. So after several devastating floods that caused the Bayou to rise over 50 feet and devastate over 40% of the buildings and bridges, they decided to form a flood control district and built reservoirs and pumps that would last them 60 years. Well, after 60 years, they thought, well, maybe we should do something. So they did form a flood mitigation plan, but found it a little too costly to implement. So instead of building new seawalls and pump stations, they allowed over 7,000 homes to be built in an area where their own plan recommended they not be built. Then it rained and poured for days and days, and they lived soggily ever after. Next city, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times in this coastal city. Plagued with hurricanes throughout the decades, the city was forced to take action after Andrew blew through in 1992 and caused $16 billion worth of property damage, over 600,000 insurance claims, 11 businesses went out of business, and over 930,000 insurance policy owners were left without insurance companies to manage those policies. So they took that advantage and they adopted the first ever statewide code, building code, and they created their own insurance safety nets within the state of Florida. And they joined the NFIP. Everything was great until there was still flooding in certain areas. And when a study came out and found now they not only have hurricanes, but their flooding now is caused by sea level rise. So they took action on that because they have $1.2 trillion of commercial and residential property value in that area. And they were very aggressive with a $400 million plan to install more pump stations and raise their roads by a minimum of 3.5 feet. And they lived bronzed and happily ever after. So we have city number one with a permanent fix. They raised the roads by 8 feet. So they raised the whole town. They ended up raising the whole town by 8 feet. They never have to do anything again. City two, they had a long-term fix with no follow-on plan. City number three, they've been forced to be proactive with periodic review. So which one is right for your community is the question. And what does this mean to us in the commercial real estate world? It's to build or not to build, or to buy or not to buy. Because in this world, the municipalities are driving a lot of the costs to develop property or to be able to sell your property and have someone want to buy your property in floodplain areas. So development costs, along with your materials and your labor, you've got construction costs, you've got code, and you have the opportunity to build to code plus if you want to, but there's not a whole lot of incentive to do so. Insurance, flood insurance is driven by FEMA and the National Flood Insurance Program if your community decides that they want to participate. Then there's another program within FEMA called the CRS, the Community Rating System, where you can get points that automatically reduce your FEMA flood insurance policy by a certain percent. It's automatic. This map shows you for Virginia in green the communities that have chosen to participate in the CRS, excuse me. So you see there's an awful lot of blue in coastal areas for those communities do not choose to participate in the CRS system. The problem also with commercial real estate in floodplain areas is money. You need money to buy something or to build something, and a lot of times those properties have to be evaluated, appraised. And in the appraisal world, they are driven by law of what they can look at when they appraise a property. You'll see the toolbox here. You have costs, actual costs, you have market data, sales comps, and then an income capitalization method. What they don't take account for in appraisals, because they can't, because there's no market data to support it, or any flood protection elements in your buildings. So you can have a building with flood vents, and you can choose to pay for all that, but it's not going to go towards your appraisal because they can only go by market data. Same goes for LEED. If developer owner decides to build a silver or platinum LEED building, most of those elements are not accounted for in the appraisal. That is a problem with that. Also, if you're not using a lender that's backed by the federal government, you don't have to buy flood insurance. But if your lender requires it, then you are, and for a commercial building, your limits are $500,000 for a FEMA-backed flood insurance policy. Then if you want to further insure your business, you have to look outside the market for private insurance, and sometimes that's very, very expensive. And incentives. Incentives don't exist for flood mitigation elements in your building. You're probably familiar with energy tax credits and historic tax credits and all kinds of things to incentivize the renovation of historic properties or to add energy efficiencies in your building. There's no such thing as sea level rise insurance. There is none. It's only flood insurance. And the insurance companies don't care why it's flooding, why you're in a floodplain. They are driven by the federal insurance rate maps and the rates there. So there are no incentives other than reducing your insurance premium to adding anything related to flood mitigation in your buildings. So the only thing certain in the industry is uncertainty in the market. Insurers like certainty in the market. So you've seen all the wild graphs today. Insurers, it's going to be very, very difficult to see insurers want to or be able to insure for something such as flood level rise when there's so much uncertainty. So then we get to the opportunities. Opportunities we see are, like I've heard here, work with your established groups, agencies, federal, state, and local municipalities to develop policy. That's what people in the commercial real estate industry can do. You hear, we're at the beginning of this. This is only the 5th year of this conference. It's just beginning. It's a perfect time for commercial real estate professionals to get into these groups and start developing policy instead of let it be developed and then complaining about it afterwards. Taking advantage of municipalities with flood mitigation programs. There are Hampton, Gloucester, Chesapeake use FEMA funds to either raise or raise homes. And sometimes they rezone them for open space because you get credits for the CRS for more open space, or to rezone them for something, and that can be a very good opportunity for commercial real estate, rezoning for a different use. So what's being paid for is the properties are being raised and then rezoned, and then commercial real estate can come in and build that at the newer codes. Some of the communities, to get points in the CSR system, also are increasing their building codes. That's a good thing and a bad thing. It adds to costs, but when it's done and by municipality or by larger area than that, then you will find that your appraisers are able to add that into their appraisals of your building because everybody's held to that new standard. Norfolk is looking right now to raise their BFE to building codes to BFE +3. They're getting a lot of pushback from commercial real estate developers. That's a lot of cost to add. Again, another opportunity, offer services that will reduce the property owner's flood insurance premiums on existing buildings. One example is an 8,000 square foot multi-family unit. Their flood premium payment was $7,800. To add flood vents, reduce that premium to $1,500. So things like that can be done. Filling basements, moving a property, things like that. When you talk about filling basements, that creates another opportunity in itself where now where are people going to store their stuff? Well, maybe there's an opportunity then to build a self-storage facility or something like that. Check cities and counties that participate in the NFIP for bids. There's grants that are available. There are no grants for commercial real estate, but the grants are mainly targeted at residential real estate. But here's a current bid out, an RFP from the city of Hampton for bids to raise 9 properties in the city. Those are some great opportunities, and it just takes a little bit of research to get into. And here's just some of the resources available. A lot of our sponsors are included in that. And that's all I have. Thanks so much.
We'll hold questions to the end. Dr. Robinson.
Good afternoon. thank you for the opportunity of participating in the conference today. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about RISE. It's a new organization that's just got stood up. What I'm going to tell you this afternoon, just a few minutes, what RISE is, how it got evolved, and some of our current efforts as we go ahead. We're just getting started. We're about 4 months into having our funding in place and the go-ahead to operate. So there are no final results, but we're doing a few things which seem to be coming together quite well. So in January 2016, I think we heard Curtis say this morning, talk about $120 million that came through HUD as part of the National Disaster Resilience Competition, came to Virginia for green infrastructure implementation at the Ohio Creek section in Norfolk. Of that, part of this award, and it was the only NDRC award that had this, $5.25 million were put aside for this so-called Resilience Lab Technology Accelerator, which was intended to, instead of just putting in infrastructure and having the engineering firms come down and build stuff and go away, maybe we could learn a little bit from what we're doing. Maybe we can improve on it, innovative, and perhaps build some businesses local to the area where we could gain some technical know-how, which then could be taken out to the rest of the world, and explain how. So that became RISE. It's a 501c3 organization, and the Commonwealth has pledged $5 million in addition to that. And where we are right now, we got final HUD approval for all of our activities in August, and so we're off and running. Although the NDRC award was towards a specific location in Norfolk, RISE is a regional effort, and we do want to engage and work with all the other cities down in Hampton Roads. We formed a board. I formed a board early this year. We have Ann Phillips is on our board. Thank you for your time and your help. So the vision for RISE is to grow the regional economy around three main resilience areas: community revitalization, water management, and resilience measurement. That's very broad, so we could spend a lot of time going off in all sorts of different directions. So we really have to focus very, very closely on what we're trying to do. The Norfolk early on became one of Rockefeller's 100 resilient cities. They're all over the world. And many of them are coastal communities, and many of them deal with the same problems that Norfolk's dealing with. So we have a great brain trust of other people working on the same problems, and B, a global market for anything we can come up with that is special and new, innovative, and scalable and replicable around the world. So our mission is to accelerate global market activity through the 100RC and through other opportunities, but first of all to develop and demonstrate technologies and capabilities in Norfolk and in the Hampton Roads region. We want to use the region as a living laboratory. We've already started doing that within Norfolk. The idea is that there's problems already ongoing, and can we get in and test and develop new ideas around that. RISE is not the one to be doing the work and coming up with all the new ideas, but we want to facilitate partnerships and collaboration with different companies, both local and throughout the country and international, and foster economic growth. It really is very, very focused on economic growth. Now, the key to what we're trying to do here, of the $112 million in the NDRC work, about 20% of that is a procurement spend which is as yet being defined. And so we can, and we intend to develop, as we develop the technologies and the new ideas and the innovations, we can start to use that procurement, which is a sizable sum of money, as a prize. So teams can come in, solve problems. If they demonstrate it, then the city will buy it, and it'll be used in the NDRC work. In that way, we can use the procurement as a prize, and we can get several very large-sized prizes out of this. So we are working with the procurement departments as well as other resources to help develop that process, but it's something quite new that we're doing now. So one of the things we want to do, we have this fairly complex area in Norfolk, which is it's sort of an interface between stormwater, tidal flooding, wetlands. It's got it all. Plus, Norfolk's got problems, and the whole region has different types of problems throughout of it. So we want to establish a water sensor test bed, and what that means is that we want to establish the infrastructure where the people doing R&D and measuring what's actually going on in a coastal area in terms of flooding quality, water quality, water flow, water levels, can come in and actually instrument this region and start to take measurements. And we need to do this using a wireless network, but I'll get to that in a second. What seems to be of interest more and more these days is knowing where what the water level is. It's a very localized, a very temporal measurement, so using the highly expensive water level sensors currently available, currently used by some of the larger agencies is not an option. The intent here is to develop low-cost water sensors where you can put hundreds all throughout the city, and then during tidal events and rainfall events, we can start to get a real-time map of water levels. We want to measure and assess the rainfall and stormwater management, which is a big problem in Norfolk and in Virginia Beach and other areas in the Hampton Roads region. Can we do better? Where are the choke points? Where are the problems happening? Also, there is a big push to understand the current state of the quality of the water that's being put into the river before and after the implementation of the green infrastructure in Ohio Creek and any other new infrastructure that gets put in the region. And salinity measurement and the dissolved oxygen, they're of interest to the wetlands folks, where you start to have fresh water coming in from stormwater and the tidal water mixing, and you have the ability to mix those two sources of water. So knowing what's going on in real time is very helpful. In order to do this, what we've had to do is to establish a wireless communications network for all these sensors. Sensors these days, they work on a wireless basis. You don't always have to send someone out to go and make the measurements. So you can get continuous measurements over and over. So one of the things, early on things RISE has done is to get vendors in to show us their communications networks. Something fairly basic, but there's no infrastructure like that in Norfolk right now. And so we put out a solicitation, and what's sort of most exciting is we've got 4 to 5 vendors, right now 4. 2 of them are local, they're homegrown folks, so we're already starting to get some of the local folks, local companies developing this sort of thing, and 2 are national companies. So we're kicking that off very shortly, and hopefully we'll be able to get the best solution, but also get some new ideas and to help develop some new businesses. This is an example of what's been going on in Norfolk, where they wanted to develop last year a low-cost water level sensor. Top right is the sensor that's put on the Hague Bridge, just down below that. That's just staring down at the water and reporting out the water level every 6 minutes wirelessly. It's reporting to this unit here, which is called the Gateway. That's the communications network. And there are 6 other sensors that are being put around this region in Ghent. You see down here, the yellow dot, oops, I shouldn't have touched it. The yellow dot is the Gateway, and the orange dots are the other sensors that are put around the neighborhood. We want to grow this, we want to expand this. We're hoping to get from DHS 30 more water level sensors. There's more that could be made by this company here. So we want to have good awareness. I think the recent report by the Union of Concerned Scientists advised that the way that you deal with chronic flooding is awareness, knowing what you can do and how you can get from A to B, how you can operate around flooding. And the intent is for these flood sensors to feed data to these sort of information sources. So we're already doing that. That's already in place, and we're going to expand this. Another effort we're about to kick off here is this so-called Ballantyne Boulevard Intersection Challenge. In the neighborhood in Norfolk, the Chesterfield Heights, there's one road in the west and one road in the goes north and south. That's it. The one in the west currently floods. That's going to be raised and moved a little bit northward. But this one here, this is the north-south, it is at 11 feet, so it's okay as far as flooding goes to a large extent. But it's got 1, 2, 3 sets of traffic lights and a light rail going across, and they're not synchronized. It can take 15 to 20 minutes to go across this intersection. What's this got to do with the resilience? This goes to do with the connectivity, the connectedness of this neighborhood. It is very disconnected physically. It's disconnected in terms of the transportation. It's also disconnected in terms of digital access, but that's a whole other thing. So we want to work this problem here, and we know that we can find solutions. We can put this out as a challenge prize and get solutions put in here. No new roads, just new sensors and actuators and signals and some artificial intelligence probably. But also it's helping us in our discussions with the city in developing this idea of procurement as a prize. If we put this out for a prize, will the city offer to have it implemented and used in its operations? And that's a process in itself that we've started. And finally, our big nugget over the next 12 months is going to be reducing the operating and maintenance costs of green infrastructure. That's a problem that everyone's having. You get this nice new berms, pumps, wetlands, grasses, you name it. It gets very expensive for the city to operate it and maintain it every year. In fact, this is a typical breakdown. Most of the cost comes from people in maintenance and pump operation and equipment, tidal floodgates and pumps, etc. Much less on the other direct costs. So how do you address this? Well, I don't know, but we certainly know that there's people out there thinking about it, and we want them to come in and develop their ideas and show that you can cut down these costs by a significant amount. If they get it right, it'll be bought and implemented as part of the NDRC work. So we're off and running. That's the idea. That's the concept behind it. And we want to grow the businesses that come up with these ideas. We want them to build it, test it, develop it down in the Hampton Roads region, and stay there while they sell it and market it across the world. Thank you.
So I had a thought when Kathy was up here, if you'll allow me for a second. You know how if you go to LL Bean's website, as you go to other websites subsequent to that, Facebook, whatever, you'll have an LL Bean pop-up on there, right? You know, it's kind of the learning environment, I guess, that your computer's got. What do you think Kathy's got after she Googles exploding toilet? So I just can't imagine what must come on through there. All right, so real quickly, I'm gonna use a keyboard, or hold on a second. All right, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about the Port of Virginia and who we are, because I think it's important to kind of frame the context. I think the best way to kind of explain who the port is we're a catalyst for commerce, not just here in Hampton Roads, not just for the Commonwealth of Virginia, but across the Mid-Atlantic seaboard into the upper Midwest and points beyond as we reach that. We create jobs across this region, across the Commonwealth. We move cargo, of course, and we foster and attract economic development. That's why we exist. Briefly, most of you all know this, we have 6 terminals across the Commonwealth, 4 down Norfolk Harbor and up in Newport News, 1 up in Richmond, and then 1 up in Front Royal. Front Royal's real tricky to get a ship up there, but that's an intermodal facility that's close to some interstates and obviously train. We're the 5th largest port operator and owner in the United States, behind, you know, the big boys in New York, New Jersey, Los Angeles, and Long Beach, and those kinds of folks. So when I say what's good for the Port of Virginia is good for the region, is good for the Commonwealth, so the converse would, of course, follow that what's bad for the Port of Virginia would be bad. If you subscribe to the fact, which is true, that 1 in every 10 jobs across the Commonwealth is somehow tied indirectly or directly to the port and our operations, you can see what kind of an impact interruptions or a long-term chronic problem that would plague the port would have on us. When you talk about the pillars of the economy, if you will, in Hampton Roads, there are probably 3 that we think of, and somebody in here is going to get their feelings hurt. But obviously federal spending, tourism, and then the port. So certainly in the days of sequester, the port and goodness knows, timing being the best thing in the whole world, time right now at the port is fantastic for what's going on. In the days following the opening of the third set of locks of the Panama Canal last June, so 16-ish months ago, we saw a 10,000 TEU. TEU are the 20-foot equivalent unit containers, the half containers, if you will. First 10,000 TEU ship to visit Hampton Roads, or the Port of Virginia. That was followed this year with a 12,000 TEU ship by a 14,000 TEU ship. So you can see ships are getting bigger. So now it's build a better mousetrap because we've got to keep up with that pace. If we want to remain number 5 and be one of those very select groups of facilities that these major shipping lines call on, we have to invest and be able to accommodate these ships. 2 big efforts underway. One, Paul Olson signed jointly with my boss, John Reinhardt, a study called a General Reevaluation Report for what we colloquially call the Wider, Deeper, Safer Initiative to get the Norfolk Harbor and approaches down to 55 feet and a little bit wider to accommodate these ships more safely and more efficiently. Under Colonel Kelly's tutelage, in fact, I think Tuesday, it's open for public comment. So we've come a long way, and that's pretty exciting. So here in the next few years, you're going to see we're probably going to come knocking on Delegate Stolle's door asking for money here before long to get the Norfolk Harbor down and attract these big ships. What we're doing right now at the Virginia International Gateway, which is our large facility in Portsmouth, is a $320-ish million investment to double the size of that facility. That facility, if you're familiar with our operations or who we are, is the semi-automated facility. Very electrified, very autonomous in many cases, very safe, negligibly impactful on the environment compared to some more, other worldwide port kinds of facilities. Across the river in Norfolk at the Norfolk International Terminals, we're going to break ground next month on a $350 million taxpayer-funded project to turn that from a very manual kind of diesel operation also into an electrified operation. Hybrid shuttle carriers, which are a piece of cargo handling equipment, electric ship-to-shore cranes, electric rail-mounted gantry cranes. Those are things that we're doing at the port to minimize the impact via pollution, via noise, via even the way we have to light the terminal. Obviously in an automated stack, we don't need to light, so the light pollution is less. So those are the ways that we're taking this opportunity and these investments in this capability to really get smart about who we are and how we are. Now, I couldn't stand in front of a bunch of Virginians as the representative from the Port of Virginia and say we're not investing wisely and we're not investing without looking towards the future. So when we talk about our resiliency efforts, we talk about it in kind of 3 ways. And the first is know yourself. And that's what I want to talk about first, is knowing yourself. So what we've done is we've commissioned in all terminals, all 6 of our terminals, we've just concluded a resiliency study that identifies those critical points of failure or the critical infrastructure that's going to bite us on the rear end when we least expect it. Maybe it's flooding, maybe it's karsts and geological formations up at the inland port up in Front Royal. That's obviously a little different to what we're talking about today. But the opportunity and the requirement is to maintain our continuity of operations because, again, what's good for the port. So that study now allows our budgeteers, it allows our engineers, it allows our maintenance folks to prioritize our investments, prioritize our actions, and make sure that we mitigate as many of those risks as we can to make sure that the commerce continues to flow. Those infrastructure kinds of vulnerabilities could be IT, they could be electrical power, they could be the transportation network itself, and just continuity of operations. Real quickly, I'll give a shout out to our brothers and friends from Old Dominion University. We've partnered, I alluded to the Norfolk International Terminals electrification, or what do you want to call it, project. The $350 million investment. We commissioned a study with the Virginia Modeling Analysis and Simulation Center as part of ODU to make sure that we were building smartly, that we were building with an eye towards sea level rise, and led by Dr. Joshua Baer. Many of you all know Josh. We delivered that report, or had that report delivered to us this spring. It validated the design that we had for NIT. It validated the fact that we're building smartly, we're building high, we're building hard. We made some equipment procurement decisions based on the study, and ultimately it ties into our long-range planning and risk mitigation efforts. Kind of have a picture once in a while, for goodness sakes. So that's what NIT is going to look like. Again, all electrified inside those stacks as we go forward. Real quickly, I just want to talk about this for just a second. So I flew airplanes in the Navy. Aviators know you carry a little blue book called a pocket checklist. Things go south when you're flying in the airplane, you pull it out, it tells you what to do because your brain probably is fried if your plane's on fire. So you want to have some of those things that you know you're going to do methodically, that you're going to do the same way every time, and it's the right thing to do. And you'd rather have those kinds of procedures and processes figured out, as I say, at 0 knots and 1 G, when you're not moving and you're not in an emergency situation. So that's what this resiliency playbook is. There's an interruption in IT, there's an interruption in power, there's flooding, there's a snow event coming, there's a hurricane coming, there's a nor'easter set in. What do you do proactively? What do you do reactively? And then how on the backside do you learn from what you did and update that playbook? The second part of our resiliency philosophy, this is the last slide by the way, is know the environment in which you exist. So I honest to God, at the top of this, it says, we're not an island. And then when everybody kept saying it today, I went, well, I guess I can't say that anymore. But this is a team sport. You know, so we've talked about military installations here. I know a little bit about those too, and they're not an island. You rely on external sources for electrical power or external communications nodes. Folks live out in the economy, and certainly the Port of Virginia and our facilities are no different. We can bring boxes on and off terminal all day via ship, despite flooding, but it doesn't do anybody a lot of good if we can't get our colleagues, if we can't get the trucks, if we can't get the trains. And so you've got to know the environment in which you exist. And this is the kind of effort, whether it's the intergovernmental pilot project, if it's work with the Army Corps, if it's work with the city of Norfolk or other municipalities, that's huge. And then the third part is you've got to test those procedures and you've got to test those relationships through exercises, both internally to yourselves, so you know yourself again, and externally. And there you see some of the things we do, and exercises for all those good reasons down there at the bottom are why we do those. And I think that makes us better. I think that allows us to understand and identify opportunities upon which we can collaborate. You know, I've talked about ODU, I've talked about the Corps. We've got great relationships, and we found new ways to tackle some of those programs. So that, if you talk about whole of community, if you talk about whole of government, that's the opportunity, I think. So with that, I will relinquish the podium. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I'm the last person to go in this panel, which is called Engineering and Architecture Solutions. And I'm with Clark Nexsen. We're almost 100 years old. We're a multidisciplinary firm. I'm happy to say that many of you in the room and even some people on the panel are a number amongst our clients. So it's a real honor to be here talking with you today. And I'll be talking not just about engineering and architectural solutions, but gratefully also our partnership with the Virginia Sea Grant. Technical execution is very much in the news, right? We saw shortly after Harvey, this article said that the layout contributed to the flooding, citing specifically sprawl, weak rules and regulations, and poor land management practices. This article cited the flat landscape, which really isn't a design thing, okay, let's be clear. But flat landscape, aging infrastructure, and again, sprawl. So I'm happy to say we've been very busy at Clark Nexsen. We've got this thing licked. I will be rolling out all the solutions. Sadly, that's not the case. But you know, again, I get invited as a practitioner, right, to talk about solutions. So I hated to disappoint you, but we don't actually have a new thing or a novel thing, right? We introduce into our work and to our projects many of the best practices that we've been hearing about all day, right? And they're pretty simple things. You can reinforce or you can defend. You can allow or simply accommodate, right? Or you can relocate/retreat. Those are the three basic ways that you can get through this in terms of where we are right now. There's a fourth possibility, but that none of us want that. So what have we been doing other than integrating best practices? Well, we've been trying to better ourselves as an organization through partnership. And so Troy Hartley and Virginia Sea Grant a couple of years ago, we came together and based on a model for an intern summer program that we had been running to augment our professional practice, we embarked on a resiliency fellowship. And so we invite, from all of the various schools that you see here, we invite and encourage applications to bring a resiliency fellow into our multidisciplinary firm for the summer to do some kind of a research project. And for the students in the room, around the end of December, the application will be posted on our website. So we'd love to have you involved. The first year we did it, 2 years ago, Michael Stelfox, a landscape architect, came to us with a proposal for community-based resiliency study. And Michael did some research, he did some case study analysis, looked at the city strategies in and around Virginia Beach, and then ultimately proposed a site design. The case studies that he looked are likely well known to many of the people in the room. Those were the kinds of larger scale landscape architecture projects that he considered as a pattern. And even closer to home, the Thalia Creek master plan in Virginia Beach was considered and scrutinized. Michael then looked at the CIP strategies in and around Virginia Beach and picked the one here, the Holland Park plan. And so he was looking at the area, for those who know Virginia Beach, on and around Bow Creek, where the golf course is, right, and the Windsor Woods. This area was actually hit by a storm at the beginning of the summer, so Michael had the opportunity to go out and see what happens in that area when it rains hard for not all that long of a period of time. And by the time he was completing his study, many of these people had their possessions stacked out on the curbside with the last band of gypsum wallboard from their houses waiting for the city to pull it away. So this is a very real thing. We don't have time. We don't have time now to go into everything. But basically, what Michael was doing was proposing converting the presence of water, which was a liability, and converting that into an amenity by basically daylighting the streams and doing other landscape architecture interventions. A series of images here. He was brave enough to incorporate the community into his proposal. And so he invited them to the Bow Creek Rec Center to show them what was going on, and invited and allowed participation from the community in what he was proposing. For any of you who have ever done that, that's a pretty scary thing, right? So that was brave of him. They actually voted, and so he got real-time response of whether they liked it or not. When we propose certain kinds of projects at a certain scale, there's always that awkward moment when someone points to a map or points to something that illustrates the proposal and asks where their house went. And that, Michael had to come up with an answer to that. The next year, Aishwarya Borate, who is a urban designer and planner, looked at place-based models, particularly social infrastructure, and what that means in terms of disaster resiliency. So what is the role of social infrastructure in disaster resilience? That was her question, with a specific emphasis on social capital. So social capital, you can see there's the bonding capital, right? There's a community and the communities near it. That's a bridge that happens horizontally, and then vertically it's how do you link those communities with larger entities that exist that may be able to provide relief or support. Again, case studies looking at several incidences all over the world in which social resiliency may or may not have played a factor, both in the response but also in the recovery. And horizontal ties have a lot to do with how well the response effort goes, and the vertical ties have a lot to do with how well recovery goes. Aishwarya then concentrated within Hampton Roads and looked at several communities, ultimately deciding on the city of Hampton, which, thank you, they were exceptionally cooperative in the course of this study. Looked at a couple of different criteria in order to pinpoint locations within the city of Hampton, and then ultimately decided on two neighborhoods, the Back River neighborhood and the Hampton River neighborhood, which, again, right, if more time, you come to my office, we'll do another presentation, but very different in terms of their demographics, their socioeconomic status, but interestingly enough, sometimes inverted in terms of their preparation or their conception of what the risks really were. So sometimes just because people have dollars, it doesn't mean they have cents. Looking again at a lot of the other criteria that were mapped in a very confusing and vexing manner. And then this capital, right? And it can be social capital, it can also be natural capital. And so proposing ultimately an intervention that has to do with reclaiming spaces to turn them into public spaces so that they can become a nexus where social resilience builds and ultimately serves the community. So it did end up becoming a kind of a discrete project, which most often is where in professional practice we operate. We operate at the level of a discrete project. That's what we do, right? We get commissioned by somebody to do something, and we do it. And it has a scope, and that scope is not of our own authorship, and it has a budget, and that budget is not of our own choosing. And so we cooperate with our clients in order to get the work done. But there's a critical distinction here between, say, if we can generalize, Michael's project, which is a discrete project with a discrete scope, and Aishwarya's, which really got more into the realm of policy. And most of, again, what we do as practitioners sits well downstream of policy and is very much affected by it. We do get sometimes commissioned to do studies and analysis and to look at someone's operation and their physical environment and decide how we will protect the assets, right, the things and perhaps the people against damages. And so here we're talking about impact into operational issues. And then we counsel them on protective measures. Sometimes we get to do that. We are multidisciplinary practice, so we get asked to do that perhaps more than some others. But the scope of concern varies. The willingness to confront risk directly varies, right? The military is particularly good at confronting risk. I mean, they don't do anything without confronting risk directly. Many private sector clients look forward to this as much as a proctological exam. I mean, it's not what they do. It's not how they choose to operate. So we end up with this kind of scenario where, we are trying to mitigate what could be done, the recommendations that they should, but most likely will not implement against the costs. And the costs of what? In some cases, it's the cost of a very real or very known or very foreseeable or very chronic risk. In other cases, maybe it's going to happen, maybe it's not. Who can know for sure? Who knows which of these charts and which of these particular lines we will ever encroach on? It becomes very difficult. Policy helps a lot, right? So as Kathy suggested earlier, we did not collude other than walking back from the movie last night. But this idea that the code requirements take the volitional aspect out of best practices. If they are a recommendation from us that may or may not be implemented, that's very, very different than if they are required. So code plus, meaning that should that should inflect the code to establish a new or a higher standard. That's a big deal, and we've seen that again and again. We've seen it with energy standards. We've seen it with all kinds of things. When you get to a certain point in your project and you have to do something about your thermal envelope, then it makes sense. But if those kind of requirements aren't there, there's really two aspects to policy. One is a requirement as such, which becomes somewhat non-negotiable. The other is incentive. And so, whether it's performing a risk assessment, knocking a certain cost off one of the things you have to pay for, or having a tax deduction that could fund that somehow incentivizing that correct action. So certainly what we do is well downstream. What we do for the most part is well downstream of policy. But we've been really happy to allow something like our Resiliency Fellowship to rehearse our cooperation, not only internally as a multidisciplinary organization, but also with Virginia Sea Grant, with ODU, with VIMS, with Virginia Beach Economic Development, which happens to be right downstairs from our office, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, the City of Hampton, any of the other municipalities and agencies. I'm happy to say that a number of you here have been to our office to participate in those Resiliency Fellows. There's something disarming about an academic project, both internally for us and also in coordinating and collaborating with other people. When a student is coming forward with certain ideas to be tested, it's a lot different than us kind of getting our marketing hat on and trying to sell something to somebody. Humility was mentioned earlier. I'm fond of Aquinas' definition of humility, which is it's magnanimity and truth. The magnanimity is there's great potential, and we, with our skills and the union of our cooperation, can certainly achieve a number of things. The truth is there's a lot of work to do, and we're going to need to work together to do it. So I'm coming forward in the spirit of professional humility. I hope you don't misunderstand it for either impotence or concession to the problem. But in the interest of continuing the conversation, I cede the balance of my time.
Questions?
This is for Commander Owens. From a commercial real estate perspective, well, you made an excellent presentation. I've never heard it from that perspective before. In this Dillon rule state, would it be useful for the Commonwealth to take a role in things, let's say the Hampton Roads Metropolitan Statistical Area?
That's a great question. I can't speak for the commercial real estate industry, but you could see the map, just the CRS map, in which communities participate in that and which ones don't. So to get points in the CRS system, that lowers your score, which actually raises your percentage of premium reductions. So to increase your building code gives you more points, and that directly equates to lower premiums. But it directly equates to higher construction costs. So the communities as a whole, you could look at it and saying, you've got a $100 million building, and to add all those extra costs for flood mitigation for Code Plus, or what the building code is 15% more. And if you're doing it on a Code Plus basis without being required to, your building's not going to appraise for that, and you're going to have a gap in your lending opportunities.
Well, there's also, I'm sure the developers are telling the Norfolk City Council that if they raise their building codes, they'll build someplace else.
That's exactly right, and they'll probably go to the areas that are blue or green.
For CRS, for building codes, for things like writing a task order contract that Hampton or anybody else could use for some of these mitigation things that is specific to Hampton Roads, and help them out that way. And
well, they have to look at also when there are those extra costs, and say everybody is doing it, are the rents going to reflect those extra costs? And that would be, maybe changing the scope of the building to something smaller. But you've got Miami Beach there. They've got $1.2 trillion in property value. They can absorb those higher rates for increased building code. But maybe Norfolk can't, maybe Portsmouth can't. And so they're going to be left with, why don't we have multi-level buildings here? It's because they're being built somewhere where the code is less.
so I say that I don't know what the answers are, but studying
Right.
that as whether the Commonwealth ought to get involved in those CRS and building code and things by metropolitan statistical area rather than letting each city do it might be. I don't know whether it's a good idea or not, but it's worth looking at.
That's a really good point, and that's a point of bringing the CRE industry in at this level of policymaking and not waiting. Thanks.
So first, I'd like to applaud your panel and more recent speakers in sort of addressing the positive side of resilience. So learning and adaptation as a way to add value and increase our capability in the future. Specifically, I also want to applaud Paul for bringing up the social capital side in a room full of a lot of engineers, because that's a very strong operative part of resilience, especially in this region, but probably in most stressed regions. And I saw some great maps and models and analysis results, and I wonder if you have suggestions on how do we act upon those, how do we address policies, initiatives, or education to deal with this social capital aspect.
Yeah, so I have an academic background, as was mentioned in the entirely too long introduction. But which isn't your fault, by the way. I'm sure you were given that. But and I think as part of architectural education, it kind of is synthetic. So I was hoping that something like what Aishwarya ended up investigating would be part of the conversation. But we're a multidisciplinary firm, so for a lot of the engineers, it's kind of, what is that? Why are we doing that? Why are we even talking about that? So that education, I believe, isn't limited to the extent of our firm, of our office. We have very good engineers, and we want them to be primarily good engineers, as we want our architects to be primarily good architects. But as we unify our efforts, whether they're in the realm of practice or policy or really partnership, we're going to need to be able to communicate with terminology and agency beyond our own proficiency and skill.
I was wondering, we have, we're looking at dredging the channel to 55 feet as an opportunity to bring in additional business. What other things should we be doing from an adaptation standpoint that might generate business through the port?
So I think, when I talked about the electrification of our terminals, I think we also potentially have engineered in a vulnerability that if we don't develop some resilience for the electrical power distribution system there. So I think a next step that we would potentially take is look at some energy, probably not independence, but some security there, whether it's through some microgridding, probably not renewables just because real estate's at such a prime there. But I think those kinds of things, we're lessening on the source side with the pollution and the noise. And I think the opportunity to bring more is if you don't recapitalize your terminals, if you're a port operator, you're just not going to attract those ships. Those ships are only going to make a couple, 3 calls on the East Coast when they come here. And so by continuing to do that, we continue to build that better mousetrap, if you will, to bring them in. And again, to make sure that mousetrap, if you will, is continuously operating, I think is important. I'm not sure that completely answers the question, but I think the one thing when I saw that question was to make sure that we're building smartly and developing some security for our electricity.
Questions? You guys are too easy.
This may be because they want a break. Does anyone else have any questions for our marvelous panel? Well, thank you all very much. That was terrific.